Welcome to the Poisoning Podcast. I'm your host, Erin DeLullo. Please like, rate, and share this show with a friend. Today joining me is Utah State Representative Tyler Clancy. I came across an article in the Salt Lake Tribune talking about how he, a police officer, and a harm reductionist were working together to solve the state's overdose crisis. Sometimes we all focus on national solutions, but I'm interested to find out what these solutions Representative Tyler has been working on in Utah and how they might be applicable to other states. So please enjoy this episode. Welcome to the show, Representative Clancy.
Thank you so much for having me, Erin. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Well, I think I've been following you for a little bit on X/Twitter. For those, it's hard to give up the old name. But when I saw the Salt Lake Tribune piece, it really piqued my interest. Let me read the title. It's a Provo cop and a social worker are teaming up to end overdoses in Utah. And you don't see that much nationwide. So tell us a little bit about what you've been working on with a harm reductionist.
So, as you might imagine, it didn't start out this way. And so I'll bring it back to you and give you a little context. Earlier this year, I had seen it just out on the streets that harm reduction programs were giving out 10 needles for every one that was returned. And I was a little frustrated by that and didn't really understand that. And so I was seeking to gain some insight on that and seeking to learn more about, why is this our current practice? What turned out was a convening of sorts with harm reduction providers, with treatment providers, and with a number of other interested parties who I think traditionally hadn't been in the same room together. And so what came of that was what you saw, that House Bill 199, and seeing that there was a blend of, can we do harm reduction in a way that leads to pathways to recovery? And so that was kind of the nexus. It didn't start as I would say, a collaborative effort, but when we all got in the same room, we did have some critical conversations, but we all realized we were wanting the same outcomes.
I think that's usually the case. Everyone wants people to have a great life and be a functional member of society. It's how do we get there? You have a background in law enforcement.
That's right. My day job, if you will, when I'm not serving in the legislatures, I'm a police officer with the Provo City Police Department. And I think if you are in law enforcement in the 21st century, you really get an up close and personal view of the drug crisis on our streets. And the number one and number two drugs that we see on our street is fentanyl and meth. And so I think it's an important perspective to bring, right? I always give the analogy of we're like the 75 blind mice. We're all touching a different piece of this crisis. And so we're sharing our perspectives. The biggest thing that I would say about that is I think fentanyl is different. I have loved ones who were long-term heroin users in its heyday. That kind of long-term use, you just don't see it that much anymore with the potency and the dangers that fentanyl has.
Yes, I've interviewed quite a few folks in recovery who were heroin users, but pre-fentanyl, and I just don't know if they would have been here because naloxone wasn't distributed widely and fentanyl wasn't in the drug system then. So it's really changed the game. I believe I was reading statistics in Utah. Fentanyl is your number one overdose killer, drug overdose.
That's right.
In the state right now. And the numbers that were pulled, I think you're even still sort of increasing from the last report I read.
That's right. We did have a slight increase year over year. The statistics I think are most shocking. Here in Utah, we had 606 individuals die of a fatal drug overdose. And that number stayed relatively constant, which I think speaks to your work to say that's 600 new people every single year. And so it's different than other graphs because you can't be in that graph twice. And that is just a staggering statistic. The other piece I think that's important to realize that you alluded to earlier is the number one cause of death for homeless Utahns is a fatal drug overdose. 35% of all homeless Utahns who died last year did so from a fatal drug overdose. That's really the crisis that we're seeing.
So, and that led to your work last year in homelessness, correct? I mean, you had a bill about providing services, pink slips, things like that. Would you discuss that?
Yeah, you're exactly right. This year and last year, we worked on policies to get better data about homelessness. I think one of the challenges is that as a policymaker, with the data that comes from the federal government, there's really only one problem and one solution, and that's homelessness and housing. And I think that's tied to what's traditionally called a housing first model. What we're trying to do in Utah is take a different approach, and we want to be more granular with our data, where we know that if the number one cause of death for homeless Utahns is a fatal drug overdose, well, there's a big crisis there of substance abuse disorder that we need to dive into. And the intervention for someone that is addicted to meth or has been addicted to meth for the past 5 to 6 years, that's going to be different than someone who gets evicted because the rent went up. And so what we're trying to do is be able to measure that so that we can get the right intervention.
And this background in law enforcement, it shaped your approach to drug policy. Do you feel your fellow Republicans look to you in the legislature for guidance on this?
It's a great question. And I would say too that it certainly comes from law enforcement because you spend a lot of time with individuals who are in the thralls of addiction. But I also don't think I'm that much different than my colleagues because the opioid crisis has touched so many American families that it's not uncommon to have a loved one or a close family friend be wrapped up in addiction, whether that's opioids, which is certainly more common here in Utah, but also methamphetamine or other substances that can lead to kind of that life of despair. And so I think what we're trying to do, and I think why our efforts are gaining momentum, is because people are ready to try a new approach. Certainly, we can see the merits of some of these different harm reduction programs, but let's make sure we're not missing the forest for the trees and making sure that those pathways to recovery are mission critical.
I was surprised to learn that you had syringe services in Utah. I would think it's not a popular position in many red states, right? So I was really surprised that was it happening. I do think people need to understand when it's taken away and there's not another process put in place, infectious disease can spread rampantly because people with addiction will do whatever it takes to, inject their drug. And then you have a whole nother health crisis. And infectious diseases like HIV are expensive to treat and hard to contain. And then you're relying again on the state. So I praise you guys for taking a very thoughtful approach to curbing that spread. When it comes to addressing addiction and drug-related crimes, how do you navigate the tension between holding people accountable and recognizing the public health issue?
Great question. And whoever has the answer, let's make them the czar of the crisis. But no, I think you nailed it. I think honest people can agree that it's a public health crisis and it's also a public safety crisis. And for too long, we've sat on other sides of the room and just continue to tell each other why the other one's wrong. But certainly someone that needs help, someone that is, so deep into substance abuse that they can't see anything else. That person absolutely needs help. But if we fail to hold someone accountable when they're breaking into your home, breaking into your vehicle, stealing a car, all of the kind of crimes that you might associate with addiction, that's really where the rubber hits the road. How do we respond to that? I think Dr. Keith Humphreys at Stanford has had a lot of good ideas about this. And what he talks about, and I think where he kind of is able to point out where certain initiatives has failed, is when you remove the adequate pressure that's needed to get people into treatment, we misunderstand the power of addiction. If you tell someone who's addicted to fentanyl and they're injecting 8 to 10 times a day, hey, we'll let you do whatever you want until you're ready to get treatment. That's a one-way ticket to death and despair. But at the same time, how do we apply that pressure without overburdening that person in the justice system and leaving what I call the scarlet F of a felony on that person's record? And so I think it's balancing that tailored approach of the adequate amount of pressure to get people into treatment, to get people into help, and to keep the community safe, while making sure that we have those really robust reentry and healing efforts on the back end of our criminal justice system so that we're actually solving the problem and not creating new ones out the back door.
Second chances are so important, and we say that in naloxone, but it's also, how can you move on with your life in recovery if you can't get hired?
Mm-hmm.
If you
You're
can't
100%
create
right.
a stable job. I'm going to be sharing in this week's episode, this week's Substack, this episode, but then an article here in West Virginia where our current attorney general, who's new, hired a gentleman who was revived twice on naloxone, and now he's working in state government. And I think it's a great example because we have to let the stigma of having been an addict be gone, right? You have to when someone is in recovery, if you don't employ them, how are they going to move on? The compassion is really missing, I think, in that piece in our society.
I couldn't agree with you more. And as you have done, thousands of times, but when you spend time with people who are in recovery, talk about a champion, talk about someone who I want at the table making these policies. And when someone who's in long-term recovery is able to share about their path, they're gonna ruffle feathers on both sides of the aisle, per se. But I think that's important. And it's important to have lived experience at the table, not just in the community, but also, I would say, specifically in these efforts to tackle this crisis.
So now, are you the youngest elected member in Utah, or is it nationwide? I saw two things and I wasn't sure.
I'm the youngest in Utah. I think there's younger legislators than I am. I think there's other states that you can get elected, at 18 or something like that. I got elected at 25, and that was the youngest in our states, in our state at that time.
Well, the maturity is impressive. There's something, I don't know what your parents did, but I would like to instill it into my teenage boys right now that I feel are really lacking some maturity at home. But they can be very proud of you. You are doing very serious work at your age.
So it's been interesting that you say that, Erin. So I grew up and I had no idea what fentanyl was. And by the time I was 20 years old, I had lost 2 friends to fentanyl.
Wow.
And I remember in 2018, and that was when I had lost some of these friends that I'm talking about. Yeah. Fentanyl was an accidental thing. And if you remember the famous rapper Mac Miller, I was a fan of Mac Miller's music, and all of a sudden he died from a fentanyl overdose. And reading the details about the story, I'm like, fentanyl, what is this, from a hospital or what in the world? And in this case, Mac Miller had overdosed because he was using cocaine that was laced with fentanyl. And I remember even in prior to law enforcement, I was in the nonprofit industry, fentanyl, commonly known on the street, was something that you were worried that your heroin might be cut with. And I can
Mm-hmm.
tell you beyond the shadow of a doubt now that most individuals who are living on the street who are addicted to opioids, they would not even accept heroin. They only want fentanyl, and they want the strongest, most potent batch. And so I think it's been, and it sounds morose, but it's been enlightening to see this transformation on the street, both as just as a person, but then as a policymaker, to see how the drug crisis has evolved. And so I hope what it can do is just at least inform a little bit of a unique perspective as someone who grew up seeing this rapid transition to what we have today.
So your friends, I would consider them poisoned because I assume they didn't know that they were taking fentanyl. Yeah, they took something.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, and I think that there's a difference between living on a street, which is so hard, and I very much understand why people would want to mask the pain of that, like not having a home, not having a community, really no dignity or purpose, or feeling of no dignity or purpose. But our permissive drug culture has caught up with us over the decades, and now young people think they can go to a party, take a pill that is just something their friend got from a pharmacy, but it is not from a pharmacy. It is from, China or a cartel.
Gosh, you nailed it. And that's really, I think, what so many families are worried about. And I always say to some of my peers, it's not your father's drug culture anymore. If someone bought an OxyContin on the street, if I'm going to field test that, there's a very low probability that it's actually a real OxyContin. It's going to be something else. Is it going to have fentanyl in it? Not necessarily, but right now it's just at this fever pitch, and that's why I loved your podcast name, The Poisoning, because I think you're exactly right. That is the right answer. And how many parents have had a child who they knew was struggling. They knew maybe were taking sleeping pills, abusing sleeping pills in order to go to sleep at night, or these different things like that. But yet when they buy something on Snapchat or Telegram, their daughter or son never wakes up. And that is why this is so important that we tackle this head on.
And I feel we are in a time right now where our federal government wants to focus on supply, which has its place, but we have not been winning the war on drugs, right? Via supply. So I'm so pleased to see you take on the demand side, because it is a two-front war, really, to keep people off drugs and alive.
I love that you said that. When I think of a war, you think of everything you can possibly do. You don't just think of the battlefield, which I do think of as the supply, but also on the back end of the intelligence and the manufacturing, what goes into fighting a conflict. And that's really what I think is missing here is, we have law enforcement officers, whether it's CBP or Border Patrol or interdiction agents, who quite literally risk their lives to interdict these substances from flooding our communities from, as you mentioned, China and the cartel. But at the same time, we have to support those individuals who are out there fighting that battle by going into the community and figuring out what's leading people to this demand and this despair. And if there was an easy answer, we would have found it already. But I think we need that same intensity and that same effort. That I love that, and I'm going to steal that, Erin. the two front war.
Yeah, I feel since I've worked in Republican politics over the years, we've always been more focused on a supply side. So I am so thrilled to see what you're doing, and I think it is changing. But I even have people reach out to me saying, "Oh, Erin, the Fentanyl Harm Reduction Act just passed," and I'm like, "That's really great. It should be classified as a bad substance permanently. I don't think that's going to really change anything in any immediate sense in helping save people's lives and getting them into recovery. So it's hard for me. I'm sure you get a lot of feedback on both sides. I actually was Monday, President's Day. I was in an indoor play center because it's so cold here in West Virginia with my youngest, and I had the article printed out, the Salt Lake Tribune. I was gonna go through it while my son's burning off a lot of energy. And in walks a friend who's also on our state's opioid foundation. We have a foundation here in West Virginia. I believe you have a commission in Utah. Is that it? For settlement? And I showed him the piece. He's like, and of course the sub headline is about over our supervised consumption sites, which he's like, supervised consumption sites, that's not going to happen here. And I'm like, yes, I don't really see that happening in red state America. And I want to save everyone, but I don't know that that is the best way.
I agree.
The fact that you're even having these conversations with someone who does advocate for it and can have an open dialogue needs to happen more. And I am trying to push people to be more attuned to what's going on in their own state and community, because I think you can make a bigger change there than necessarily waiting on a bill for Congress.
I couldn't agree more. It's amazing what can be accomplished on the state and local level. And one of the things that you mentioned is, how do people that hold really incongruent beliefs on the same issue even stand to be around each other? Well, I think it starts from that place of mutual understanding, and it starts from a place of honesty. I don't pretend to be something I'm not. I don't pretend to be a radical harm reductionist. And the folks who I worked with on this legislation, they didn't pretend to be the biggest fans of law enforcement. And so that's important, right? To start with that honesty, because that allows us to move forward. But what I did think was interesting, one of the best parts about this bill that's moving forward, it's going to be in the Senate now. It passed the House floor this last week. Is our response to opioid poisoning or an opioid overdose. Is we are going to have county health departments equip EMS, firefighters, first responders, and the chat team, so our social workers that go to 911 calls, with resources. And so in that moment, after someone is saved using naloxone or Narcan, we're going to be able to put that person on the phone in real time and to a treatment provider and say, I can come pick you up right now. Or, hey, Officer Clancy can take you there right now. We're not changing the Good Samaritan law to make sure people are continuing to call 911, but we do want to make sure that we're connecting those services, because we know the data shows about 15% of all individuals who are saved with Narcan or naloxone, they still have a 15% mortality rate within that first year of a reversal. And so we really are trying to ingratiate all of our efforts together.
That's perfect, honestly. I mean, it was perfect. It sounds like it can get. Providing people resources. They're in a bad place. They don't know how to get help, and we just have to, guide them to it. So the friends, I want to go back to the friends you've lost. Were they in Utah? You moved from Utah or to Utah, correct?
That's right. I grew up in coastal South Carolina. These two friends in particular were friends that I grew up with from T-ball era,
Wow.
Since a young age. And so that was the first time that I lost someone that was my age. And, funerals for me had always been individuals who were older, who were at kind of the end of their life. And so this was different. It was a different feeling. And, seeing that person's family wrestle with the loss of someone in the prime of their life. Since being in Utah, certainly have lost folks that I know to an overdose, gotten to know the families. As a first responder, when you're there and you get there too late, and now you have to find the next of kin. This no, you can't hide from this crisis. You can stick your head in the sand as much as you want, but if we really care about our communities, we're joking ourselves if we think that what happens to my friend or my neighbor down the street doesn't impact me, doesn't impact my community. And I don't really think we'll ever, I think 20 years from now, Erin, I think we'll all be talking about this, and we still won't be able to wrap our arms around the crisis. The children lost, which I think we focus on quite often, and importantly so, but the parents lost. I mean, the age that people are losing their lives to the poisoning here, I mean, everywhere from teenagers to your 30s. And there's children who are left behind who are never going to play catch with their father, who are never going to get to go to a play or a show with their mom. And these are the kinds of things that we can't even begin to quantify the damage that does to our communities.
We are seeing severe societal damage here in West Virginia. We have 1 in 8 babies born addicted in 2023. We have a generation of children raised by like grandparents or just some older family member that doesn't have the resources or necessarily the energy to keep up with a young child. It is a crisis. It is a complete crisis here. And I can only imagine, that there's the same pockets across the country experiencing the same thing population-wise. So when people think of it as, yes, someone homeless on the street who's just a junkie, no, like you don't know. They may have I have yet to talk to him. I probably will. Tom Wolf. I mean, he was saved. He was able to come back to his family and reunite. But there was a period where his children did not see him, and they did not have a father in their lives.
Oh, absolutely. I can tell you, it was Christmas, and so I was or Christmas Eve, but close to the holidays, and I was working. So I was in my police uniform, and we decided we're all going to grab something for dinner, and each bring something to the department. So I swung by our grocery store about a mile away from the police department, and a really well-dressed, you could tell a successful man came up to me, and he said, "Hey, thanks for what you do. Thanks for serving the community." "No problem, sir. Thank you." And he says, "I think you know my son." And I thinking, "Oh, okay. Is your son the, cop, firefighter?" And he said his son's name, and my eyebrows raised because I did know his son. His son was what we would call a frequent flyer. So someone that's committing lots of crimes in the community, and his son was a heavy meth user. Mm-hmm. And I said, "Yes, I do know your son." And he said, "Yep, we've been praying for him to come home for a long time, and we hope that someday he gets the help that he needs, but right now he's not allowed to come home." And it struck me. I mean, that was the entirety of the conversation, but I remember leaving that night and thinking, as a police officer, we strive to treat everyone with dignity and respect, right? I mean, that's the absolute floor. But it was kind of like you said, it caught me off guard to say, this is someone's son. I mean, I see him like this, but not everyone does. I see him in this despair, in this state of filth and squalor, and I'm always frustrated with him because he's, out kind of wreaking havoc on the community. But I remember that night, it just allowed me to see a different perspective that sometimes you lose in the day in and day out, but we can't lose that. As policymakers, as activists, as whatever role we play, we can't lose that.
No, so agreed. So in Utah, I think there's a sense of, or there's been in the past a sense of working and compromising on issues. Like, was it the legislature worked with same-sex marriage advocates to find some type of laws that would work? Mm-hmm. you wouldn't think necessarily a very religious place would be. I mean, that doesn't seem like the normal way of working about. Usually it would be like, we're in control, we have the majority, we're going to shut you down, or we're just going to tweet something mean about you and angry about you and ignore you. So I know you are newer to the legislature, but how has it been working with you being there, or how are you seeing it working?
So this is my third year in the legislature. If my Democratic colleagues saw me just flatly agree with you, they would have my scalp, because sometimes they probably do feel like that's exactly what the Republican majority legislature is, just steamroll. But I'll tell you, you can see if you look through the lens of just the media and just the headlines, absolutely, the headlines that are going to take most of the oxygen out of the room are going to be your controversial issues. But yesterday we had a hearing on House Bill 329 about drug-free homeless services, and pretty controversial issue, right? I mean, there's at least a span of different beliefs. And the people that spoke to the bill, I had no idea if they're Republican or Democrat, and the bill passed unanimously. And so I think that even on these really tough issues, if you can get under the same roof, if you can really engage into these deep conversations, I'm not saying that you're going to find 100% agreement, but I am saying that I think we can do better than at least what we see on the national stage, which is what you described. Let me go on the floor speech and cut a clip of me just criticizing, my colleague or throwing this person under the bus. Certainly that's a one-way ticket to not a very successful outcome. But that's my hope. And so I really think at that state and local level, you really can move the needle there.
Yes, that's great to hear. So I bring in so much of what I experience into these conversations. So last night, I met with some leaders from a church we attend here, because they've seen some of my work, and a few of them have had children that have experienced their children doing drugs and have, concern. And I said to them, if we surveyed everyone who was a somewhat regular attendee of this church, what do you think they would know about the drug crisis in this country? And this group of 6 people looked at me and they're like, very little. And I said, well, why isn't the church taking time to educate their parishioners? So are you seeing anything that the LDS church is doing? I mean, if this is, community building, we care about people. And so now I have a new project, which I'm sure my husband is like, where are you going to have time for that, Erin? But why isn't it? And, it was brought up, well, and I said we could bring other churches into it, different denominations, like this could be very, work together to get people resources. And we want people in crisis coming to us at the church for help. But do even churches have those basic resources? Like, do they know them to be able to refer someone or place a quick call? So are you seeing anything within the LDS community to take on this very important issue?
Such a good question. I can tell you that having been in many of these rooms about that key decisions are made in about homelessness, and I think we use that word as a catch-all, but I think when we talk about just kind of the challenge that we're seeing right now on our streets, the LDS Church has played a major role, mostly on the philanthropic side of making sure that we have the resources that we need to address this, but also too from that religious side. I mean, it's probably not surprising that I live in Utah, but I mean, I think it's people forget, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a pastor. That's what drove him to, fight for the changes during the civil rights movement. I think as Christians, as people who believe in God, we shouldn't shy away that is why we care. And seeing, someone on the street, and, the saying is, there but for the grace of God go I. So that's not just a saying. That is truth. That could be any of us on the street in a different lot in life. And so there's a hymn in our faith tradition called "Because I Have Been Given Much," and that's one of the lines in this is, "Because I have been given much, I too must give." And I think that's what drives me personally. I think from a LDS church standpoint, of I would say the standard operating procedure is to find the people who are doing the work in the community and support them. And when individuals or parishioners come to a church leader to say, how do I get engaged, or how do I share my son? They're going to provide the subject matter experts to not be duplicative with the work. But I think there's always room for to do more in that space. But I love what you said, because that's definitely what drives me too.
That's great to hear. So, as a police officer in your day job, have you administered naloxone, saved lives? I'd love to hear a story or two.
Certainly. So if there's any firefighters that listen to your show, they're going to laugh that you ask if a police officer used Narcan, because we use Narcan a lot. Even when a firefighter says, "Whoa, wait, this person was diabetic," or whatever it might be, and but you're 100% right. I mean, I would say, and I'd have to pull data to give you an exact number, but just from a boots on the ground perspective, during the summer months, if I'm on day shift, meaning I work 4 out of the 7 days of a week, there'll probably be 2 overdoses within that week span of just my shift. And so then you have other days on day shift, then you have swing shift, then you have grave shift. So many, many times we'll respond, and police are usually the first ones there because we're always out. We're already out in the car driving around, and we're usually can respond faster. It's a harrowing scene. I don't want to sugarcoat it for your viewers. I have done CPR on many people who have not survived. I have done CPR on people who the firefighters get there and take over after I've been doing CPR for 10 minutes, and I never see that person again. I don't know if they survived. And then, of course, we've had successful where it doesn't get to that point where you catch it early enough that 1 or 2 doses of Narcan will bring someone back. They'll pop right up, and they're a little frustrated, and they'll walk away. And so I think it's the full spectrum, but it is I can speak for myself, but also for my teammates who, when we go to these scenes, it leaves something on you when you leave a room and you see the destruction and the squalor, and that's where this person was, and hearing the wails and the sobs of the families. I mean, it's a powerful and really a sobering reminder that it's a crisis, and we'd like to think that what happens in that 4 walls stays within that 4 walls, but it touches so many people. And I wish I could give you more success stories, but I'll be honest, I don't have a ton. I know that they're out there, but I think if you talk to your average firefighter, police officer, the overdose crisis is usually, we're picking up the pieces. We're picking up the broken pieces. Not to say that that we don't get there in time, but it's a really, really deep challenge.
Has anyone that's been revived tried to fight you after being revived from naloxone? I've heard stories of this.
Definitely. Really? It's such a, when I talk to a lot of, obviously, people experiencing addiction, and they'll describe the feeling of being high as just an absolute euphoric feeling of all the stress in the world. And in this case, if someone's overdosing, they're they're about to pass on. I mean, they're halfway out the door. And then bringing them back from that with Narcan, the reversal, I mean, it's like a punch right to the sternum, and all of a sudden everything comes back, and it can really give a lot of headache, right at that front. They describe it right at the front of the skull. And so, especially if someone, what we call a goofballing, so if they're smoking meth and doing fentanyl, yeah, they're gonna be really fired up when you bring them back. So, not uncommon.
Okay. Wow. Do you keep naloxone on you personally? I ask everyone this.
I do. I have naloxone in my glove compartment of my regular vehicle, my personal vehicle.
That's great to hear. That's great to hear. Well, we are coming up on ending. Is there anything additional you'd like our listeners to know?
The only thing I'd cap off with saying is, if they're listeners to your show, I don't have to tell them anything, but I would just say wherever you are in life, whether you're listening to the podcast to say, I want to do more. If you're a first responder, if you're a social worker, if you're a religious piece, we need all of those puzzle pieces to really build this tapestry of healing. If you're someone who's in active use or in recovery and thinking about it, we need you on the team. And whatever your life experiences has brought you to this point, it will be a valuable asset to the fight that we're all doing. So that's just mine, is just keep the fight, keep the faith. And we might not be able to change the world, but I think we can change one person or one neighborhood or one home in a neighborhood. And that's what's got to keep us going.
Amen. Thank you for joining the show today, Representative Clancy.
My pleasure, Erin. I hope you have a great one, and looking forward to seeing if we talk again soon.